Elisabeth of Austria became one of the most famous and popular heroines in the history of Europe, whose sad biography was compared to the fate of Princess Diana and not once was the basis of books and movies. This story tells us why the people's favorite princess was disliked in the palace, why she was never happy with her beloved husband, and how her life ended. This is the channel Learning the World. But before we start, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel and click on the bell not to miss new videos. Let's go! Amalia Eugenia Elisabeth of Bavaria was born on December 24, 1837, right on Christmas Eve, which her family considered a good omen. Her father, Maximilian Joseph of Bavaria, descended from the German feudal family of the Wittelsbachs, and her mother, Princess Louis Wilhelmina, was the daughter of King Maximilian I of Bavaria. Sissy's parents did not marry for love, it was a dynastic marriage, and therefore there was never intimacy or understanding between the spouses. Elizabeth's father was constantly away and spent very little time with his family, while her mother was focused on the ideal education of her daughters, so that they could later marry noble members of the aristocracy. Notably, Princess Louisa considered her youngest daughter unattractive and therefore paid more attention to her eldest, Helena, while young Sissy was almost all the time left to herself. The girl loved her life on the Possenhofen summer estate. Elizabeth spent hours wandering the countryside, spending time in the company of the four-legged inhabitants of the residence, drawing and writing poetry. When Elizabeth was 15, she traveled with her mother and older sister to Bad Ischl in Austria, where Helena was to be engaged to Emperor Franz Joseph, whose mother, Princess Sophia of Bavaria, considered the eldest daughter of Princess Ludovica a suitable match for her son. But everything did not turn out as the monarch had planned, and Franz Joseph fell in love with the young and cheerful Elizabeth, and she reciprocated. After receiving her parents' permission, the future spouses began preparations for the wedding. The emperor went to Vienna, while Sissy devoted all her time to studying. The girl studied history, political science, was interested in literature and took lessons writing. Her tutor, Count Johann Malat, noted that the future wife of the emperor awakened an incredible desire for knowledge, and it is extremely responsible approach to the learning process. April 24, 1854 held a solemn marriage ceremony. Elizabeth of Bavaria and Franz Joseph I. Despite the fact that Sissy was in love with her husband, which was rare for that time, it was difficult for her to withstand the increased public attention and pressure from the emperor's mother. Very soon Elizabeth's marriage turned into a nightmare. Princess Sophia, who was used to having complete control over her son's life, actively interfered in his relationship with his wife, and also dreamed of making Sissy a real empress who would follow all the rules of the palace. This included attendance at all official events, communicating with a certain circle of people that included only the noblest members of the aristocracy, strict limitations dictated by royal protocol, and other rules that depressed Sissy immensely. At first Elizabeth tried to draw Franz Joseph's attention to his mother's actions and her unenviable position, but the emperor was very fond of her parent and could not protect her beloved from her excessive influence. Sissy then found a hobby that became an outlet for her equestrianism. By Elizabeth's own admission, she felt truly free in the saddle and could ride for hours in the countryside. In 1855 Sissy became pregnant, but this event only added to her difficult situation. After learning that Elizabeth was expecting an heir, Archduchess Sophia devoted all her time to her son's wife. She regularly gave her advice, tutored her, went to her chambers day and night to see if everything was all right, made her walk and appear before her subjects. According to the biographer Egon Corti, Franz Joseph's mother even ordered the high fence in the yard of the royal family's estate, behind which Sissy liked to walk, because she wanted the people of Luxembourg, where the couple lived, to see the emperor's wife more often. The Archduchess' behavior depressed Sissy. She began to suffer from depression and anxiety, regularly experiencing panic attacks and other manifestations of severe stress, but no one in the palace understood her worries. On March 5, 1855, Elizabeth gave birth to a daughter, named after Franz Joseph's mother. This event did not make the subjects of the kingdom happy, who dreamed of the birth of an heir, and the Archduchess was in full control of the life of the newborn child. The mother of the emperor put the child in the farthest from the chambers of Sissy, hired a staff of servants, and gave the empress only a few hours a day to communicate with her daughter. The situation repeated itself in 1856, when Elizabeth and Franz Joseph had their second daughter Gisela. This time, however, Sissy could not withstand the pressure of her mother-in-law and turned to her husband for help, who helped her to weaken the Archduchess' influence. However, Princess Sophia found this turn of events insulting, and the relationship between her and her daughter-in-law was finally destroyed. Later, Franz Joseph began to involve Sissi in political activities. The emperor took his wife on foreign trips, and Elizabeth enjoyed the love and recognition of the people. The subjects noted her sincerity, zest for life, beauty, and love of country, and also knew of her conflict with the Archduchess, who was not popular with the people because of her participation in the suppression of the Austrian Revolution of 1848, and therefore became even more penetrated by Sissi. In 1857, a tragedy occurred in the life of the Empress that changed her life forever. During a trip to Hungary, both of Elizabeth's daughters became seriously ill. The youngest, Gisela, soon recovered, but the eldest, 2-year-old Sophia, did not survive the serious illness. After burying her daughter, Sissi withdrew completely for several weeks. The Empress had no contact with anyone except her husband, and all her time was devoted to horseback riding. Having recovered from her tragic loss, Sissi's life began to take a calmer course. On August 21, 1858, she gave birth to her third child, a long-awaited son named Rudolf. However, the birth of the Empress was extremely difficult and she needed a lot of time to recover, which the Archduchess Sophia rushed to take advantage of. The mother of Franz Joseph fully controlled the life of the newborn heir, understanding that Sissi has no strength to fight her. At the same time, the emperor went to the north of Italy to participate in the battles against the armies of Napoleon III. The absence of her husband worried Elizabeth. She was very bored, and even the regular love messages from Franz Joseph did not help her cope with her anxiety. Such a condition was not good for her health. Sissi virtually stopped eating, she lost a great deal of weight and once again began to suffer from bouts of depression. The situation was exacerbated by Sissi's desire for what she felt was an ideal standard of beauty. According to her biographers, Elisabeth Bavarian was extremely concerned with maintaining her attractiveness and slimness. She was terribly afraid of getting fat and regularly put herself through rigorous diets, did grueling sports training even when her body was exhausted, and favored corsets with tight lacing, which squeezed her internal organs and prevented normal blood circulation. When the emperor returned home, Elizabeth's reality had changed little. The Archduchess continued to pressure her and deprive her of any involvement in her own children's lives. Realizing her defeat, Sissi decided to leave. For 4 months she traveled to the Greek islands, France, England, and Portugal, an experience that gave her the long-awaited freedom she had always dreamed of. Since then, the Empress's departures had become regular. Elizabeth spent several months away from home, returning only at Christmas, which saddened the emperor greatly, but pleased his mother. By the way, it was not only Franz Joseph who suffered from Sissi's absence, but also her children, especially Rudolf. Since he was destined to be the next heir to the throne, his upbringing was particularly rigorous. The future emperor's tutors used tough methods, which, in their view, should have tempered his character. Rudolf was poured over with ice-cold water in the morning, forced to pore over textbooks for hours, deprived of free time, and once Sissi did manage to break the pressure of the Archduchess and insist on the dismissal of one of the teachers of her son, who used the most cruel methods of education. At this point, however, Elizabeth's influence on the children ended. In 1868, the emperor and empress had their fourth child, daughter Maria Valerie, who became Elizabeth's favorite heiress. Perhaps this was due to the fact that Princess Sophia, completely absorbed in raising Rudolf, did not control the life of the newborn and allowed Sissi to enjoy motherhood. When Maria Valerie grew a little older, the empress began to take her with her on all her trips abroad, and at court Elizabeth's youngest daughter was called her only child. A year after her daughter's birth, thanks to Sissi's activities, Emperor Franz Joseph held a series of meetings with the leaders of the Hungarian opposition, Ferencz and Gyula Andrássy, which resulted in the formation of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, and Elizabeth and the emperor were crowned as King and Queen of Hungary. This event briefly brought harmony to the life of Sissi, who loved Hungary with all her heart and dreamed of a similar outcome. But Elizabeth's happy time ended again in 1889. In January, Sissi's only son and heir to the throne, Crown Prince Rudolf, died. The circumstances of his death are still unclear. According to one version, he and his beloved committed suicide. According to another, he was killed for political reasons. The empress believed the latter version, but could not prove it, and it literally drove her mad. The tragic loss finally shook Sissi's mental health. She practically stopped maintaining contact with the outside world. In addition, at the same time her parents and sister Helena died, and once said, "I dream of dying from a little wound in my heart, through which my soul, grieving for Rudolf, will fly away." Unfortunately, Sissi's words proved prophetic. On September 10, 1898, the Empress, who had arrived in Switzerland under the pseudonym of Countess Hohenems, was strolling through Geneva in the company of one of her ladies-in-waiting when suddenly an unknown man ran up to her and stabbed her in the chest with a shiv. It all happened so quickly that at first Sissy didn't even realize what had happened and continued walking. According to her maid of honor, it was as if the man had tripped and accidentally touched the Empress. A few minutes later, however, she felt a severe pain in the heart and died unexpectedly. The criminal, who turned out to be the 25-year-old Italian anarchist Luigi Lucchini, was captured almost immediately and sentenced to life imprisonment in an Austro-Hungarian prison, and a few years later he committed suicide, saying before his death the following: "I am an anarchist. I came to Geneva to kill the monarch. I didn't care who he was, I only wanted to set an example to those people who suffer but do nothing to improve their situation. I did not kill a woman, I killed an empress, and that is the main thing." Sissy's death was a great blow not only to her family, but also to her subjects, who loved the people's princess with all their hearts. When her body was taken to Vienna, the entire Austro-Hungarian Empire was in deep mourning, and later Franz Joseph founded the Order of Elisabeth, a state award that was given to women for services in social and charity work. The sad story of the life of Elisabeth of Bavaria left a deep mark in the hearts of Europeans, and today the fate of the famous Sissy, still remembered by historians and biographers, has been compared to the life of Princess Diana, who also could not come to terms with the harsh realities of life in the palace, but has found incredible love and recognition of the people. Besides, the biography of Sissy not once laid the foundation of literary works and movies, the most famous of which are the trilogy Sissy by Ernest Marischka, the film Mierling with Ava Gardner as Elizabeth, and the famous animated series Princess Sissy, which was released in 1997 and was recognized as one of the best in its genre. That's all for today. If you liked the video, like it and don't forget to subscribe. Bye everyone.